show's over, folks. Jim Cornette has praised AEW for their past episode of AEW Dynamite. We talk about why Matt Hardy has left for AEW and everything that's going on with WrestleMania, all coming up next on the Squared Circle Psychobabble. Thank you for joining us. My name is Michael Valenti. Joining me via Skype is Ralph Valenti. For news, reviews, and conversations on all things pro wrestling, subscribe, hit that bell for notifications. You know, Ralph, we do once in a while talk about what Jim Cornette has to say. And it seems as if most of the time it's about him bashing things in AEW, but it seems like he's turning his opinion on AEW and actually praising them for the last few weeks, including this past episode where he said it was the best episode of AEW Dynamite, and they've been having fun with the episode, unlike SmackDown where everything looks fake. What are your thoughts on the comments?
Yeah, I think a lot of people probably agree when you compare either Raw, SmackDown, NXT, or AEW. Today, I think AEW certainly has had the best empty arena type show and presentation. And a part of the reason for that, I think, is simply because they're allowed to think outside the box, whether it's creatively, from the perspective of the talent there, what they're allowed to do, what they're allowed to say. And one of the things that we'll get into is obviously Matt Hardy did touch on that. One of the big reasons why he was able, or why he chose to leave the WWE and sign with AEW. But, they have guys that are willing to think outside the box. When you look at SmackDown or you look at Raw and you see what they've done to this point with these empty arenas, it does feel very staged. It feels very forced, and it feels very much like the guys are trying to play to a crowd that simply isn't there. Obviously Edge was able to do a good job with his promo. And kind of work with the limitations of not having a live audience there. But WWE's approach has been very much the same as you would see on a weekly basis without making adjustments to the fact that there is no crowd. So I get where Jim Cornette's coming from. I agree with him 100%. I think that this was a very good episode of Dynamite, as we talked about in our review. And I look forward to seeing what they can do from here on out going forward.
Now, do you agree that, that a lot of people think that Jim Cornette is a guy that just trashes on AEW all the time, but there are some people out there that listen to his podcast and know this is not a first where he has actually praised AEW, and there are things that he likes in AEW. It's just that we all know who Jim Cornette is, how he talks and says outlandish things, and those things end up weighing more than when he actually praises something. So do you think that having Cornette say something like this, people should really take that into consideration, or, say, hey, this actually means something, that even Jim Cornette is saying good things about it?
Yeah. I think that no matter who you listen to, it could be anybody. It could be Jim Cornette, it could be Vince McMahon, it could be Jericho. Everybody's going to have an opinion, and I don't think anybody's ever going to agree with 100% of anybody's opinion. I think with Jim Cornette, obviously, he's a guy that takes the wrestling business very seriously because that's his life. He grew up in the business. He's worked in the business. We all know where he stands on certain guys, obviously guys like Orange Cassidy, guys like Marco Stunt. He thinks that they literally crap on the business he spent his life working in. But he has been open and honest when he's been praising guys like Cody Rhodes all along. He's praised Moxley. He's praised even to a certain extent. You talk about the tag match that the Young Bucks, the tag match where the Young Bucks obviously took on Omega and Hangman. So he praised that match. So, it's not like he hasn't given them credit when credit's due. It's just that there are certain things that he's not going to agree with within modern day professional wrestling. And he's not the only one that feels that way. You'll find other people that feel that way too. Even if you go back and listen to Jericho's podcast, the most recent one with Matt Hardy, he even touches on how some of the younger guys rely a lot on, more of the aerial moveset and, high spots rather than the psychology that a lot of the guys like Jericho and Matt Hardy have to rely on now because they're older. So, I think that a lot of times people take what he says with a grain of salt, but, I think that he makes good points as well.
Right. So I do want to bring up some other things that he brought up on his podcast too. And you brought up Jericho's podcast with Matt Hardy. I want to touch on that as well. First with Cornette, basically the decision for WrestleMania to go 2 nights in the empty arena, multiple closed sets is what people are saying. Very weird WrestleMania to have.
Yeah.
Basically, Jim Cornette really ripped into Vince McMahon on this, saying that he's very stubborn for the situation. He thinks that they can even push WrestleMania to SummerSlam weekend and try to accommodate those that had to cancel travel plans to get to SummerSlam weekend instead. But here we are, and we're getting what we're getting here. So what do you think of that regard, that, you know, maybe Jim Cornette has a point where they should just postpone it? The fact that we're getting, you know, empty arena, splitting to 2 nights, closed sets. Like, why are we still having this show?
Yeah, and you know, at first I thought that I liked the idea of keeping WrestleMania intact and trying to do it as a empty arena event, simply because of the storylines. You know, you've invested a lot in storylines, especially guys like Edge, who has come back from his hiatus since he's been injured. You have Drew McIntyre, who obviously is being built up as the guy to defeat Brock Lesnar. But the more and more that you hear about how they plan to present WrestleMania, the more I feel like it should actually be postponed. So I'm actually going to pivot on off of what I originally thought. I think they should postpone it, because when you think about it, what WrestleMania really means, I mean, the all of the uh, the glory around it, all of the circumstances leading up to it, all of the storylines that are invested into it. You know, imagine having Drew McIntyre beat Brock Lesnar in front of nobody, literally nobody.
Right.
The fact that all of the outcomes for the matches can be leaked, which originally I think the plan was to hold it at the Performance Center with limited people, but now we're hearing that they plan to hold it in multiple sites, have it be a closed set. So those can be very well being the matches can be taped now. The outcomes can be announced. I don't think it's likely that a guy like Drew McIntyre is actually going to go over now, because, you know, having him beat Brock Lesnar is kind of meaningless, you know, when there's so much uncertainty. So why not push it back? Why not put it on in the summer? Hopefully all of this is resolved when they can actually get it in front of a crowd, even if it's a small crowd. It's better than not having a crowd there at all, because you just lose so much of the energy that's associated with WrestleMania.
Right. But I mean, this is Vince McMahon we're talking about here. And, you know, if something's in place, he's going to be the guy that does not want to, you know, change the plan. I mean, how many times have we seen Roman Reigns in the main event, even though fans never wanted it? You know, he wanted Randy Orton and Batista at WrestleMania 30. He basically, the fans had no other choice but to hijack the show to the point where Daniel Bryan finally got put into the main event. You know, it's getting worse and worse and worse. And now we have AEW here. So now the wrestlers feel like they don't necessarily have to stay in WWE. They can go somewhere else and get that creative freedom that they want. And the latest situation with that is Matt Hardy, who, you know, we know he joined AEW. He is officially All Elite. And, you know, he talked to Jericho on the Jericho podcast, talking about why he left. And here are some of the points that he said, talking about Vince McMahon, saying, I pitched the idea after idea after idea to WWE, never got any feedback. I would hear little chatter here, little chatter there, but there was never anything stuck or sparked a creative fire in Vince McMahon's mind. It became very frustrating. So this is something that we've heard from before with people that left WWE. John Moxley last year when he was on Talk as Jericho. And he even brought up to the point where basically if Triple H was in charge, he would be still in WWE possibly. So at what point do we have to say this is almost 100% on Vince McMahon?
Yeah, I mean, the more top guys that come out and the more top guys are prominent names, because obviously Matt Hardy wouldn't be considered like a top guy when you look at, you know, the championship title picture for WWE right now. But he's obviously a prominent guy within the wrestling industry. When the more guys, the more established names that you have leaving for companies like AEW, the more information that comes out related to how the creative team has worked and kind of how storylines are put together and how a lot of the input that the wrestlers are giving to these people, that whoever they are that are writing the storylines, and how it's just not acknowledged and doesn't get anywhere. the more this kind of solidifies all of the rumors that, Vince McMahon is kind of this out of touch and stubborn guy, which, up until this point, or maybe going back like a year ago, everybody kind of assumed that. There's always been that train of thought, like wherever there's smoke, obviously there can be fire. But now you have these guys coming out and going on these shows and going on these podcasts and wherever it may be and saying, yeah, that's literally what it's like there. You have no creative freedom. You try to pitch them ideas and it doesn't go anywhere, and they're going to run the business how they best see fit. So if you're a guy that Vince McMahon wants to push, like maybe a Roman Reigns, if you want to throw him into that category, because he's probably the one that most people will point to, they're going to continue to try and ride that horse into the ground and die on that hill if they have to. So it's unfortunate, but it's also fortunate on the other side of things, because you are going to see these guys going to companies like AEW, where they are going to be given the opportunities, like Matt Hardy, probably will be, and they'll be successful. Moxley's been successful to this point. Jericho's been successful to this point, and I have um, no kind of qualms that Matt Hardy will go there and be successful as well.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I mean, Matt Hardy's only been there one day, one episode for like what, 30 seconds. And people are talking about it like it was the biggest thing to happen in professional wrestling. And, think about if like, some of the top guys, like if Seth Rollins, when his contract comes out and he ends up going to AEW, or Roman Reigns, some of those guys, they see, Vince doesn't really book me that well. I could go to AEW and flourish. Now, there are people out there that think that AEW is just getting WWE rejects and repackaging them to make them top guys in AEW, and that's the only way they can get ratings. I agree to some extent, but at the same time, they're a startup company. They have to get guys like this so that people can get credibility. What do you think about that comment?
I'll agree with it to a certain point, but where I don't agree with it is this. The guys that have gone there, they haven't necessarily gone there with the same type of approach or character that they were portraying in WWE. Obviously, Chris Jericho is very different from the Chris Jericho that you saw in WWE. John Moxley is entirely different from Dean Ambrose. Matt Hardy, while he was given the opportunity to do the whole Woken gimmick, I don't think it's going to be necessarily the same, and I think it's going to have a lot more creative freedom, and I think that it will actually be a lot more successful in an environment where in AEW where he's allowed to have that freedom. Not only that, but I mean, you look at certain guys like obviously Lance Archer. He's only been there for a couple of weeks, but it certainly seems like the fans are embracing that, embracing him, and obviously they pushed him, um, to a certain extent, and they put him right in kind of the in a position where he's going to be working with Cody Rhodes, it seems like, and that feels fresh.
Mm-hmm.
They've been able to kind of elevate guys like Darby Allin, Sammy Guevara, guys like that. Orange Cassidy, who, for granted, he's polarizing to certain people, he's over with that fan base. So there is a certain level of success that they're having with these relatively unknown guys that didn't necessarily work anywhere else. So, yeah, are they taking talent from WWE? Yes, but WWE is not utilizing those guys to the best of their abilities. So why should they stay there and just kind of squander their last years, or some of their last years within wrestling? So,
or even guys in their prime, like the Revival. They have plenty of years left in their careers, and they're just right now they're at a point where the reports and rumors are that they've gotten all their guaranteed money, so WWE is paying them the bare minimum until their contract runs out, which I've heard April, I've heard a couple months. I don't know the exact end of their contract, but we know they're leaving. And they would be a great fit in AEW. So that might be the next one where we hear that they are frustrated with their booking, and Vince McMahon, they tried pitching ideas, but Vince did nothing with them. And this is a team that you would think Vince McMahon would like as a tag team, but never did anything with them. And it's just so weird. Like, there are plenty of guys in WWE that are Vince McMahon guys or Vince McMahon tag teams that he isn't pushing. It's so weird. Like, what has become a WWE when it comes to pushing guys? So
and one of the things that Jericho did say was, he doesn't think Vince McMahon necessarily changed his outlook on guys going back to like the 90s when you had guys like Savage, you have guys like Hogan, guys of that age leave the WWE and go to WCW and find success. Matt Hardy made this comment too. He said, once you get to a certain age, Vince McMahon kind of sees you as just another guy. He doesn't think there's much left in the tank. He doesn't think that it's worth pushing you. So, I think that maybe to a certain extent, obviously Vince is out of touch and he maybe hasn't learned from his past mistakes because obviously Hogan, Nash, Hall, those guys were able to go to WCW, Luger. I mean, an endless list of guys. And yes, WCW ultimately did fail, but it did have initial success when those guys went there, and it did feel fresh, and it was a good show for a little while at least. And they were able to beat WWE in the ratings head to head for quite some time. So, I guess Vince, you can certainly make the argument that Vince didn't necessarily learn from his previous mistakes because guys like Jericho, guys like Matt Hardy, it certainly seems like Jericho's obviously found success, and Matt Hardy, I don't think that he will be a flop when he goes there either.
Right. All right, guys. So let us know what you guys think WWE needs to do during this whole situation. Should they postpone WrestleMania? Should they keep going with what they're doing? Is Vince out of touch? And what do you think of Jim Cornette actually praising AEW? Let us know in the comments below. Don't forget to share this all over social media. We're on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, SCPB Podcast. And for news, reviews, and conversations on all things pro wrestling, subscribe, hit that bell for notifications. For Ralph Valenti, my name is Michael Valenti. Thank you for watching the Squared Circle Psychobabble.